Hi there, everyone. I think we'll just get started. So my name is Layla Kennedy, and I'm the treasurer of SYLA. So I'm delighted to welcome you to our event today on pensions with Tilney. We have Nadia Atanasov and Ewan McPhee speaking to you about pensions today and how to kind of maximise the potential of those. Just to thank Tilney once again for their continued support and collaboration on events, which has been really successful so far. So I'll pass over to Nadia for hopefully another successful event.
Thank you, Layla, and to everyone else for joining today. And thanks for the intro. We are delighted again to have the opportunity to work with SYLA once again today. So as Layla had mentioned, I'm presenting today alongside my colleague Ewan McPhee, who's also a financial planner in our Edinburgh office, on the lovely subject of pensions. So at the end of the day, the point of this webinar is that we just do not want to work longer than what we have to, and getting your pension right will help you achieve that, I promise. Pensions are really important, especially for younger people, and it's so important to know what's going on with your pension. And I promise you will thank your future self for paying attention and making changes to it, whether they're small or large. So just to let you know, we have to include this slide in all of our webinars. We are not given any personal recommendations or advice during this webinar or recommending any courses of action. And just to let you know as well that your investments can go up as well as down. If you're looking for any tailored areas of advice, please get in touch with either myself or Ewan after the call, and we'll be more than happy to help. So over the next 30 minutes, we will explore pensions, and in particular why we should all be saving in one, and ways to maximise your funds during the accumulation phase. So basically, as you're building up your wealth. Ewan will cover the investment piece, looking at the common types of investments held within pensions and aspects to consider within each. I will then look at the $1 million question that everyone asks: how much do I need to retire? And that will hopefully give you a bit of a flavour of what your money may be able to buy you in retirement. I'll then explain a few ways of how Tilney can help if you're looking for bespoke pieces of advice, including aspects outside of pension planning. And finally, we will cover any questions that have been asked if we have time. So on that note, you will see at the bottom of your screens a little Q&A box. So feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar or at the end if you feel more appropriate. So I will now move on to the main part of the presentation. So why should we use pensions? Well, basically, it is the best savings vehicle towards your retirement. There is no other investment out there that will automatically give you a 20, 40 or 45% increase in value as soon as you put money into it. And that's essentially what you get when you make pension contributions. So I think when it comes to retirement as well, people forget that your income stops. So you need something to support your expenditure. And I think that's sort of a hard concept to think as you are building up your wealth at this stage. So in the past, people haven't necessarily had to think about it because they have had final salary pensions, which provides them with a secure income, guaranteed, rain or shine, every single year. But they are long gone for the likes of us, except if you're in sort of like a teacher's pension or in the civil service, for example. Of course, we will get a state pension. Well, hopefully we will get a state pension. And dependent on your circumstances, it may meet all of your expenditure, but that's not guaranteed. So at the moment, it's just over £9,100 a year. But for a lot of us, that might not actually cover all of our expenditure. And if you tie that into the fact that the state pension age keeps increasing every single year, and the legislation is currently being looked at once again, and they're looking at increasing the state pension up to 68, which means that we will all have to work longer. So with personal pensions, like the employer schemes that you all hopefully have, based on current legislation, you're able to withdraw the funds 10 years before the state pension age. So if state pension age is increased, I would assume as well that the minimum pension age will also increase to 58. It's currently 55 at the moment. So apart from tax relief, there are other benefits with regards to pensions, such as the investments growing in a tax-free environment, and any income and gains produced within the investment are also tax-free. A big benefit of pensions too is that you can get 25% of the value of your pension tax-free when you reach the minimum pension age. So you can choose to take the whole 25% out at that one time when you reach that age, or you could take out little bits of it, or you could defer to take it at a later date. It's actually quite flexible. And if you work your pension well in the future, you could also be able to withdraw funds of it with up to the tax-free amount, so that you could basically get the whole thing out tax-free. considering that when you've put it in, it's growing tax-free, and you've also got the tax relief on the pension contributions going in. So nowadays, with auto enrolment, provided you have sufficient earnings, you're all enrolled into a pension scheme automatically after 1 to 3 months, and you're usually set up to pay the minimum standard set by the government. So at the moment, that is 8% of qualifying earnings, with your employer having to contribute at least a minimum of 3%. You are able to opt out of the auto enrolment scheme if you want. However, I really hope that you have not, because basically what you're getting is free money from your employer and as part of your benefit package, and every little bit of money will help you save towards your retirement, so you get a comfortable retirement. There are various qualifications when it comes to auto enrolment, and it can get quite confusing, so I won't actually go into it in extreme detail today. But on a whole, it depends on how the scheme is set up. Your percentage contribution as your pension contribution to the scheme can be different. So for example, if it's based on qualifying earnings, your pension contribution will be based on your salary between just over £6,000 to £50,000 a year. So for example, if you earn £25,000 and you also had a £2,000 bonus, your percentage contribution into your pension would be based on the amount over £6,000 up to £25,000. So basically it will only be based on £18,760 of salary. Whereas if you based it on basic earnings, the percentage contribution would be based on your full £25,000 salary. So effectively you actually get a higher contribution if you're in that type of scheme. And then finally, if it was based on total earnings, your percentage contribution into your pension would be based on a full salary and your bonus. So your percentage contribution would actually be based on the full £27,000. So it's worth knowing, so you know exactly how much you're actually getting into your pension scheme. And knowing the investment strategy is actually so important. So based on current legislation, the earliest that I will be able to access my pension is in around 30 years time. So imagine it gets to 15, 20 years time and you sit down and you have a chat about looking at retirement or what you can do to make changes towards your pension, and you find out that your investments have returned next to nothing. So that's effectively 15 to 20 years of potential growth that you would have missed out on by not looking at the fund early enough. So that is something to really pay attention to with regards to your employer schemes, and Ewan's going to cover that in a bit more detail. As with the majority of your employer pension schemes, you do go into a default fund, and that is decided by your employer from outset. So it's impossible for them to know all of their employees' individual needs and appetite for risk. So that's why you should sort of put the onus onto you to then have a look and ensure that it is meeting the criteria that you want it to. So as we are accumulating our pension funds, this is where we can sort of make the most impact of our money. And one of the best ways to maximise your money is looking at how it goes into the pension scheme. So generally speaking, all pension contributions will attract tax relief. How this works is if you're making a pension contribution, an automatic 20% is added into the pot to account for basic rate tax relief. So this will arrive in your pension scheme. It's usually up to about 6 weeks after the contribution goes in. So thinking about it, this means if you are a non-taxpayer and you make a contribution, you will also gain that 20% relief because you are because of the automatic process of applying tax relief to pensions, even though you wouldn't have paid any tax yourself. There are rules on basically how much you can contribute, whether you pay tax or not, but I won't go into that today because it gets a little bit complicated. If you are a higher rate taxpayer, you can also claim back that other 20% of tax that you've paid. So as a higher rate taxpayer, you pay 40% tax on the amount of income over the higher rate band. So pension contributions will attract an automatic 20% into the pension fund, and then you can get the additional 20% tax you've paid back, but you'd have to submit a self-assessment return. And what happens is they refund you back any tax due, which is a great planning exercise for those that are in that bracket. And that also applies if you're an additional rate taxpayer. So you still get the 20% tax relief given into the pension fund, and then you claim the 25% extra via self-assessment. So if you move on to salary sacrifice, this is a great way of getting additional funds into your pension. So contractually, how salary sacrifice works is that you enter into an agreement with your employer to exchange part of your salary in order to receive a higher employer pension contribution. So what this in turn does is reduces your salary and therefore the amount of tax, national insurance, and if you have it, your student loan repayments. And it's basically because your salary is reduced, your employer will also have to pay less national insurance for having you as an employee. And sometimes they actually rebate that back into your pension pot for you. Not all pensions offer salary sacrifice, so it's definitely worth having a check to see if that applies for you. A downside to this is that because as part of the agreement you're effectively reducing your salary, the notional benefits attached might be affected. So for example, your death and service payments amount might be attached to your post-sacrifice salary rather than your pre-sacrifice salary. So that's something you could check with your employer as well. And with regards to tax relief, salary sacrifice actually gives you tax relief at source because your salary will have reduced, so as to well the income tax that you're paying. So that's actually great if you're living in Scotland, because as we pay an extra 1% anyway, so we pay 21% tax and 41% tax. If you're doing salary sacrifice, because you've reduced your salary at the start, effectively you're reclaiming that 1% back on your net income, rather than having to do a self-assessment return in order to claim that extra 1%. So what I'm going to do now is pass to my colleague Ewan, who's going to look at sort of the investment side of pensions.
Thanks, Nadia, and thanks for everyone for joining today. So the first thing I want to touch on is the importance of considering inflation when you're managing your money. The Bank of England have a targeted inflation rate of 2% per annum, and this graph illustrates the impact of inflation over the longer term. As you can see, over the last 20 years, the purchasing power of the pound has more than halved in value. So why does it matter to us? Let's take the Freddo as an example. In 2005, the Freddo was worth just 10p, and by 2017, it cost 30p. So over 12 years, the price has trebled. So this just shows us that if we don't grow our money over time at equal or higher rate than inflation, we'll be able to buy less in the future with the same amount of money. Next slide, please, Nadia. So in this slide, we're really touching on who should be investing, and it's really dependent on your own individual circumstances. This very simple picture here shows that cash in the bank should be a short-term investment, and by short-term, we mean 0 to 5 years. Interest rates are also lower now than ever. So even if you choose to tap your money in a long-term deposit, say for 2 to 3 years, those rates are still inadequate. Cash is typically viewed as low risk, but people often forget about the risk of inflation, which means that your money is actually worth less today. Investing, on the other hand, does carry risk, and it's that old kind of risk-reward scenario, but it's definitely not a short-term fix, and we would only really suggest investing money if you're not able to access it within the next 5 years. So with investing, what we're doing is we're trying to aim to generate returns in excess of inflation so that over time your money is not eroded. And next slide, please. So when we're young and we have time on our side, even the smallest contributions to your investments can add up over time. And it's so important to save what you can, because when it comes to long-term investments, every little really does count. So the effect of compounding, it's so powerful that even Albert Einstein declared it the 8th wonder of the world. Why? Because of the power of compounding. It's this snowballing effect that happens over time. So as your investment returns generate more returns on themselves. So even for quite modest sums under the influence of compounding are likely to see your savings grow quite substantially over time. This chart on the screen shows two £20,000 pensions growing over 30 years. The first has £100 added to every month, and the second has £300 added to every month, with both pensions growing at 5% a year. So the graph demonstrates how a small increase in monthly contributions can lead to a big increase in the total value of the pension over the longer term. So let's talk through this example in a bit more detail. So we have two solicitors, they're both the same age, they both invest for 30 years in the same investment, and the only difference is the amount they put in. The solicitor who saved £300 a month has saved in total £72,000 more than the other solicitor, yet their pension pot is actually £163,000 more. The difference comes down to the power of compounding. So it's really something you should be thinking about how it's going to impact your future savings as well. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the power of starting to invest from an early age rather than starting later. And even missing a few years of growth can make a massive difference to the end value of your portfolio. Using the same example again, I'll show you how much of a difference it can really make. So two solicitors again, they both invest £5,000 a year, both into the same fund, growing at the same rate until the age of 65. The only difference here is that one started at 25 and one started at 35. The 25-year-old who invested an extra £50,000, however, their pot is worth 286,000 more. So that's £236,000 of free money. So I hope this shows that starting early, for example, for a home purchase is really, really meaningful. Next slide, please. Here we have outlined the major asset classes that most people think about when we're discussing investments. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see equities. So basically, this is kind of what is also known as stocks or shares. And buying a share essentially makes you a part owner of a company. Of the asset classes on this slide, equities are typically the most volatile, as share prices are intrinsically tied to the performance of the company. Bonds are basically IOUs offered by a company or the government. When you purchase a bond, you receive an income until the bond matures, and then you get your money back. One way of thinking about this is to imagine you are giving a loan to a company, and the income you receive is the interest on the loan. Bonds tend to be a bit lower risk than equities, and as such, tend to offer a lower return. The third list is funds. So these are managed by professional institutions and are often made up of a collection of equities or bonds. Funds are managed with a certain remit, so that may be geographical. For example, it could be focused in the UK, it could be focused in the US, it could be focused in Asia, or it may have invest in a specific area, such as small cap companies. So it's a really great way of achieving diversification within a relatively small portfolio. And then lastly, we have alternatives. So these encompass quite a wide range of assets, including commodities, property, and hedge funds, which often add to increased diversification within a portfolio. Next slide, please. So within our pensions, we're often given the option of lifestyling. So this means that the fund you're investing will be targeting at a specific outcome. So these funds all share a similar asset allocation journey until 5 years before your selected retirement date. As you can see on the slide, asset allocation will then start to change depending on the lifestyling option that you have selected. There are 3 examples on the screen. Firstly, we have target annuity, with the aim of purchasing an annuity at retirement. Secondly, target cash, where the aim is for everything to be held in cash at your specific retirement date. And then finally, target drawdown, where you don't use the entire fund at once, and so some of it will remain invested. That's why the diversification doesn't change much in comparison to the others. Next slide, please. So one useful type of fund to consider when you're looking at your pension is a target retirement fund. So the way this works is that you pick a target retirement fund closest to your planned retirement date. So for example, if I'm going to retire in 2040, the fund will be called something like the Vanguard Target Retirement Fund 2040. So what the fund does is it will automatically maintain the right balance of shares and bonds depending on how far away you are from retirement. As you can see in the graph, at the start, most of your money will be in shares rather than bonds. And basically this is because shares are a bit riskier and they offer a higher potential return. However, as you get closer to retirement, the fund gradually starts to move more of your money into bonds. The idea is that the closer you get to the retirement age, the more you'll be interested in preserving what you've got with bonds rather than making big potential gains with shares. After all, we don't want our pensions to decrease in value just before we intend to use them, as we won't have enough time to gain any losses. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the importance of picking the correct fund within your employer pension. On the screen, you'll see two graphs: the performance of the fund, which is used a lot. This kind of outlines a performance of one of the funds which is used quite a lot in large corporate group personal pensions. So the graph on the left shows the fund's performance since inception, and the graph on the right shows performance over the last 5 years. The red line represents the performance of the fund, and the blue is the benchmark. The benchmark is what it's compared against. So anything lower in the benchmark is considered to be underperforming. Now, if you look at the graph on the left, you can see that the fund has outperformed the benchmark for the last 12 years. However, if you invested in the fund 5 years ago, you'd actually lost money. So you put £1,000 into the fund 5 years ago, it would actually be worth £987 today, which is obviously not a good return at all. So what I'm really trying to illustrate here is the importance of ensuring that you regularly review the fund your pension is invested in. I'm now going to hand you over to Nadia, who will be discussing a bit more about your choices at retirement.
Thanks, Ewan. So basically, pension legislation has changed dramatically since April 2015. So what we've done on the screen here is illustrate all the different ways that you can now draw on your pension. This is based on current legislation. So as mentioned previously, you are able to draw up to 25% of your pot tax-free by the time you reach minimum pension age. But as I said before, it can also be deferred, so you could take it at a later date. From there, this is where your choices can vary at retirement, and not all of these are necessarily available with the current pensions you have at the moment. But there's no need to worry about it at the moment, because as younger professionals, we're still quite a long time away from retiring. So we'll still have the choice sort of time to be able to make these choices in the future. So after withdrawing tax-free cash, you can decide to give it to an insurance company. And what they do is a calculation to say, for example, if you give me a pot of money, like £300,000, I will give you a guaranteed income of X amount every single year for the rest of your life. That is effectively called an annuity purchase, and the incomes you can get at the moment from an annuity purchase can be quite low due to the poor interest environment that we're in at the moment, but I'll cover that in more detail in a bit. Or for example, after you draw your 25% tax-free cash, what you can do is choose for the pot of money to remain in the pension scheme, and basically it sits there like a big bucket of money, and you can decide to draw on it whenever you feel like it. So you could withdraw £30,000 one year, you could withdraw £10,000 the next year, and due to poor interest rates recently and how the way people have been retiring recently, this tends to be the option that people tend to go for, and it's called flexi access drawdown. And it's mainly because nowadays people tend to front load their retirements. So for example, if you think about it, when people come to retire now, they automatically want to start spending the money. So you'll see they go on these big man cruises, or they buy like sports car, or they gift more funds to their kids to help with house purchases and things like that. So what they're doing is spending a lot of the money at the start of their retirement. So there'll be big expenses in the first, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And then after that, they'll be spending a lot less. And that's mainly because they'll start to have slowed down a little bit more. Maybe their health will have deteriorated more, and they'll have just less things to do. So that tends to be why people go for flexi access drawdown over an annuity purchase, because you can't really change the amount of income that you get with an annuity once you purchase it. But the problem with flexi access drawdown at the moment is that we're quite concerned that people may be able to run out of money, because you can access it how and whenever you want. You may run out of money in the future. But also at the moment, it's about the investment strategy. So a recent FCA report stated that 33% of all non-advised pensions are held in cash, which is so alarming if you consider the things that Ewan talked about with regards to inflation and growth and timescales and everything. So it's definitely something to worth, that's why it's so important to continuously look at the investment performance of your pension scheme. So basically, this is the question that we've all been waiting for. How much do I need to retire? It's such a loaded question, because what one person needs to retire is totally different to another, and it's impossible to tell someone what you need in order to retire, because it's totally based on lifestyle. Even if you think about it logically, The minimum amount a person needs in London to live by normal standards is completely different to a person in, let's say, Glasgow. So what we can only do at the moment is control what we're putting in, how the investments are performing, and making sure you're just sort of building up your pension pot for the future and making your money work hard for you. But as an indication, we'll sort of give you a bit of flavour for thought here. So this graph assumes a pot of £500,000 when you retire at, let's say, age 60. And basically assumes inflation and also assumes a medium growth rate as well. So if you were to draw a net income of £33,000 a year from your pension pot, with all that combined, your money would actually run out before you reached 80. So if you add more strings to the bow and you think, oh yeah, £500,000, you know, isn't a lot or whatever, the average size of a pension pot in the United Kingdom at the moment is £62,000 according to the Telegraph. So it shows why pension provision and thinking about it is so important at the moment. And also, if you're thinking the £33,000 net is quite a lot of money, if you think if there's two of you and if you have kids, for example, it actually isn't that much, because if you think about, you know, mortgages and things like that, you know, it is sort of a normal amount of money to think of. So I suppose that gives some flavour for thought of what you should be aiming for, at least when it comes to your retirement. So this is another question we're asked frequently, is you'll see people say, oh, my pension says I'm going to get £9,000 a year. What does that actually mean? Well, this is actually an illustration document that's produced with your pension fund every year, sort of on an annual basis. So when I mentioned before about buying an annuity, this is what this pension illustrates, and that's what the document refers to. So this is an illustration I have done as an example, and it's based on a current pension pot. So at the age of 29, a current pension pot of £10,000, and if I were to continue to receive contributions of £230 per month into my pension paid via salary sacrifice until I retire at age 65. So what this illustration does is it produces its own low, mid and high growth rates based on a whole load of assumptions done by the pension company, and it usually does take into account for inflation as well. So based on this illustration that I've done today, the low growth rate is 0% a year, the mid growth rate is just under 3% a year, and the high growth rate is 5.9% a year. And it's basically to provide you with flavour for thought on how investment performance can really impact your pension fund in the future. So you'll see the difference between the mid growth rate and the high growth rate. So the mid growth rate, if you continue based on all those assumptions, your fund at age 65 would be £129,000 a month. And at a high growth rate, it would be £282,000 a month. And that is basically due to a difference of 3%. Just under 3% every year. So it's quite a substantial amount of money that you could get by looking at the underlying investment strategy. It then illustrates, depending on the size of your fund, if you purchase an annuity, so as I talked about that guaranteed income that you gave to an insurance company, if you purchase an annuity, the amount that you would get as a guaranteed income. So as an example, if you look at the mid growth rate, if you took tax-free cash and you use the residual pot of money, so if you took your 25% out and use that other 75% to purchase an annuity, you would get a guaranteed income based on all the assumptions today of £4,100 a year. So basically the reasons I brought this up today is that this is just an illustration. These are all totally assumed factors. It's all examples of what could, may and potentially be in the future. The only thing that we can control at the moment is what we're doing with our money when it goes in and how we're paying it in and what we can basically help with regards to the investment. So that is effectively what the illustration document does. So finally, how we can help you at Tilney. So just to let you all know, we do bear the cost of our initial meetings and there's absolutely no obligation at all for anything to come out of the meeting. So if anyone on this webinar is looking to have a chat, feel free to drop either myself or you an email after the webinar and we'll be more than happy to get in touch. What I've done is I've listed a couple of areas of where we can help with, but of course it's not limited to this, and you'll note that it includes things more than just pensions, because as financial advisors we can cover a whole range of things. But with regards to your pensions, we can of course help you look at them. We can look at your current ones, we can look at previous ones, help locate them, and we can discuss any potential courses of action. So whether that is looking at the investment strategy and recommending an appropriate strategy for your needs and your risk profile, or potentially looking at consolidating your pensions together if that's what you wanted to do, or what is the best course of action with regards to that. Another thing that we can help with outside of pensions is that people do tend to want to start to invest, but they're unsure of how to go about it. And that's something that we can help with as well and guide you towards that. And finally, insurance is financial planning 101, as I say. So basically, we always recommend for people to have adequate insurance policies before looking at anything else. So we're more than happy to help you look at your protection needs, especially when it comes to house purchasing, for example, or if you were to become self-employed and looking at policies that can cover your income and things like that. So basically that's all from you and I today, and we're more than happy to answer any questions if you want to fire them through to the Q&A box. I'm just going to have a look to see if there are any. I can see there's one here for you, Ewan. Basically they're asking what is the benefit of investing in a fund instead of investing in direct equities?
Oh, sorry, mute myself. So one of the negatives basically of investing in a single company is the risks involved with it, because basically you're putting all your eggs in one basket, whereas a fund on the other hand is managed by a professional. It offers you a great way to diversify your portfolio as you're getting invested in different companies, different sectors, different regions around the world. And all this helps to reduce the potential volatility and potentially improve your investment performance over the long term.
Great, thank you. I just see one that's came in as well. It says, my company changed pension provider about a year ago. However, I didn't move my existing funds to the new provider. Are there benefits to moving the provider into the new provider? The answer is yes, there could be benefits. So for example, within pension schemes, they can sometimes operate on a tiered charging structure. So the higher of a value you have, the lower of a cost you pay. So you always need to think about the cost of things because it can erode the amount of growth that you have. But at the same time, depending on where your pension was in the past, it could be that there's attaching benefits or any guarantees that are associated with the pension. So they could be very valuable and you might not want to move it in respect of that. But what we'll do is we'll pass out our details at the end of the call, and then hopefully if that applies to you, you can get in touch and we can have a further look and discussion on that. There's another question that came through you, and I'll probably pass this one to you, is what is a passive fund and is it good to invest in?
So a passive fund basically tracks an index. So an index could be the FTSE 100, which is the 100 biggest listed companies in the UK. So what that fund will try and do is basically just track the performance of the FTSE 100. So the benefits of it are that it's it's relatively cheap, and because the management charges aren't much because they're not doing a huge amount of research into the different companies. But the negative side of it is that they're not handpicking companies for you. And basically all they're doing is tracking the FTSE 100. So they're tracking all the companies within that. And obviously there's 100 companies. So you'll have some great companies in there, but you also have smaller companies you'd want to invest in. So really what I'm trying to say, it depends on you. It depends on if you're cost sensitive or not. Because the other option to a passive fund is an actively managed fund. So they're generally a bit more expensive, but what you're looking at is they'll be picking them, hand selecting them through a lot of analysis and statistics and looking at kind of the macroeconomics behind each region around the world. So it's a bit more specific basically. So but yeah, it really does depend on what you're looking for, I would say.
Great. Perfect. Thanks for that, Ian. I think that's all the questions that we have today. So what I'll do is I will end the webinar now, but I just want to give a final thanks to you all for joining today and to SYLA for allowing us the opportunity to present today on pensions. What we'll do is we'll provide a copy of the slides and the recording after this webinar today. So once again, thank you very much and hope you have a good day.
Thank you.